All right, welcome everyone to the second shir in the series. It's good to see everyone. Tonight's topic is sibling rivalry, the Torah's take on the oldest feud in history. This is a topic that we sort of planned out in the beginning of the year, and then I received actually a couple of requests to do this topic. We try to do it within about half an hour, so it's not too long. But I hope there'll be some meaningful lessons in all of this, and very least, we'll get to learn Torah together. And we know that everyone has to get ready for Shabbos as well, so it's Thursday night. Try to be mindful of that. So the origin of sibling rivalry, and we'll just move to the first slide, as really the oldest. I would say the oldest type of rivalry in the world, and the oldest machlokes that ever exist in history. So what I want to show you is a quote from a book that I read a number of years ago. From the time we were born, our brothers and sisters are our collaborators, our co-conspirators, our role models, our cautionary tales. They are our scolds, our protectors, our goads, our tormentors, playmates, counselors, sources of envy, objects of pride. They help us to learn how to resolve conflicts and how not to, how to conduct friendships, and when to walk away from them. Our brothers and sisters are with us for the whole journey. Brothers and sisters are the oldest relationships that we have, right? They're the people they're our contemporaries, and we meet them earlier on in our lives, and we go through the same things together, and therefore we have a secret code that we talk about. That code is not a spoken code, but it's understood that your successes are their successes, your failures are their failures. The things that cause you sort of shame and make you nervous, those tend to be the things that your siblings are also apprehensive about. And so it really is ripe for some of the most meaningful encounters, the most deepest and trustworthy relationships that we share. And yet we know from our lives and from our experiences and just from what we read about that siblings sometimes end up with the most bitter and rancorous and complex relationships of all. This conflict, this double-edged sword, I think is brought out in a number of important sources. Number one is a pasuk in Shir HaShirim. The verse in Shir HaShirim tells us that Ani Yeshena v'libi er. The Shir HaShirim is describing the deepest love that exists in biblical account, and that is the love in Sefer Shir HaShirim between the Dod and the Raya, the beloved and the woman of his dreams, and she is the man of his dreams. And of course, it's a mashal for the Bnei Yisrael and Hashem. And the pasuk describes that love in the following terms: Kol dodi dofek pitchi li achoti rayati yonati tamati shiroshini matavut zisira sisi laila. The raya is standing, the dod is standing at the door, and she's in the house, and he's knocking at the door, and he says, "Open the door for me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled one. For my head is filled with dew, my locks with the drops of the night." And the way he describes his love is an interesting one. He doesn't say, "My beautiful bride," my love. He says, "My sister." It's almost strange that the highest form of love that is described throughout the whole Tanakh is described based on the imagery of a brother and a sister. That's a compelling point there. And if you look at Amos Chacham's commentary on this very verse, I apologize. Some of the sources got jumbled around a little bit here, but the way Amos Chacham describes this relationship, if you look at the bottom source right there, it says, "Mi necha ke'achli," klomar halavai v'kravticha elai tieh kekirvas ach. Halavai, that the love between husband and wife, between a man and a woman, will be on the level of a brother and sister. She'en ha'achud bosha l'nashek et achiha b'farhesia. brothers and sisters are not embarrassed to kiss in public. To give your sister a hug and a kiss in public is not embarrassing at all. Fortunately, more people should be embarrassed about kissing other people, men and women, in public at Kiddush and other places that used to happen before Corona. But brother and sister, it's perfectly normal and healthy. They give a kiss. I remember when I was studying in the Grus Kolo. So Grus Kolo is in Beit Vegan, it's at the bottom of a hill, and right next door is a seminary called Michlala Labanot. So I was second year married. We just had one child, and my sister was studying that year in seminary in Michlala. So we had a natural built-in babysitter whenever we wanted to go out on a date. So my sister would come over and watch Zerachia as an infant, and it was perfect. All I had to do was walk her back up the hill and back down the hill to Michlala. And I remember one time I'm walking Ilana back, my sister, and she said, "Oh, there's the head of my seminary. He's going to think that I'm on a date, and we're Shana Aleph. We're not supposed to date yet." I said, "Don't worry. He'll probably assume I'm your brother. Don't worry about it." So she's like, "No, you better keep your distance because this is going to be embarrassing." So when I saw him, of course I leaned over to my sister and gave her a kiss and put my arm around her just to upset her and allow the Rebbe for a moment to think that somehow she was on a date. But this is really the essence as described by Amos Chacham between a brother and sister. It's the highest form of love. However, it's a double-edged sword, because if you look at the scan back up here. If you look at this source I have on top, this is the Radak, and the Radak tells us. I'm going to move it to the next page where it belongs. I apologize. The Radak tells us that the word ach has a double meaning. Ach means brother, but ach means something else as well. There are words in the English language that serve as their own opposites. They're called autoantonyms. What's an autoantonym? It's a word that means the same thing as its opposite. So think of a few examples. To cleave. To cleave means to hold on to cleave onto, but it also means to divide, to chop in half. You have a cleaver, a meat cleaver, and you cut in half, right? Inflammable means it can't burn, and it also means it's easily going to catch on fire. We have a lot of words that mean the opposite of there. To peruse means to read superficially, and it means to read very carefully. There are a lot of words that have two meanings that mean the opposite. In the Hebrew language, this is a very deep concept. It means that both yesodos, both ideas are found within that word, and ach, says the Radak, means both love, and it also means tsar, the evil. It also means difficulty, pain, mourning. So one has to be careful, because a sibling can be your best friend, a sibling can be your worst enemy. There's a story that, there are stories that sort of hinge on the comical and then on just utterly tragic. There's a story I remember years ago about two sisters that every single year they played the lottery together. Every single day they played the lottery together. And then one time they had an agreement. They said, if you win, we'll share the winnings. And if I win, we'll share the winnings. And lo and behold, after 20, 30 years of playing the lottery together, these two elderly sisters, they're in their 70s or 80s, they win. One of them wins. And of course, the next day, the other one denied ever making such a deal. All of a sudden, best friends, they do everything together, but all of a sudden they turn on one another and they became bitter enemies and they're embroiled in a horrible court battle. A tragic story that is even worse is recorded in Hasidic tales of the Holocaust, Yafa Eliach, which tells the story that one day Rabbi Israel Spiro, the Blozhev Rebbe, was friendly with these two brothers, twins. Two brothers were very close, and one of them one day they did everything together, and they would share their rations of bread, and they would make sure that one would take care of the other. So if one had a hard day, wasn't feeling well, they would support one another. Well, one day one went on a work detail, and horrible incident happened, and the Nazi guard bludgeoned the brother to death. And Rav Israel Spiro Zal saw this event, and he had the tragic and unfortunate responsibility to tell the other brother, his best friend, what had happened to his twin. And he sat him down. Before he even can begin to describe what had happened, he said, I have to tell you something terrible. And right away, the brother knew. He let out a bitter and terrible wail from the depth of his heart. And he said, listen, I know there's no words I could say to console you, but in due time, whether it's in a few days, a few years, or 10, 20 years from now, we will be reunited. And the dead will come back to life in the Tchias HaMesim. And know that this is only temporary, thinking that his words could maybe, perhaps, provide some measure of comfort. And the brother who was weeping said, "You don't understand. I'm not crying because my brother was killed. I'm crying because I don't know what he did with the last piece of bread." And Yafa Elech describes how horrors and adverse circumstances can turn the closest of teammates, of partners, into adversaries and people who don't care about one another whatsoever. This is the double-edged sword that is the sibling. So I want to show you. I want to show you on the next page a number of sources which I think bring out this contrast as well. So if you look at Mishlei, Pasuk in Mishlei says that here, I covered some of these already. I apologize. The Pasuk in Mishlei says that the B'chol Eis Ohev Hareya, a friend loves at all times. Ve'ach litzara yivaled, but a brother was born out of adversity. Hatzileni miyad achim miyad Esav. This week's parsha, save me from my brother, from Esav. The Medrash says sometimes he's a brother, sometimes he's Esav. And how do you square that? The Medrash Tanchuma comments, At motzei kol ha'achim sonim zeh lazeh. There's a rule in this world. Brothers hate each other. Brothers disdain one another. That's a rule in the world. It's the fact of nature is that siblings, by definition, hate one another. So if that's the human nature, how do we deal with that? I want to suggest that if you look at the biblical narrative, you will see that sibling rivalry is in fact the main storyline of all of Chumash Bereshis and Chumash Shemos. And that the ultimate message of these first two books of the 5 books of the Torah are really all about sibling rivalry and how to bring harmony in the family. I want to take a look at the 4 major machloktos, the 4 major disputes between siblings that comprise the book of Bereshit. They are Cain and Hevel, Yitzchak and Yishmael, Yaakov and Esav, and Yosef and his brothers. Let's begin with the story of Cain and Hevel. Cain and Hevel. So here, we have to first describe the stakes. What was at stake here? What was happening that precipitated the machlokes? So the 2 of them were offering an offering to Hashem. Cain offers an offering that came from the ground, from flax, linen, and Hevel offered sheep. And because of that, we suggest that that's why wool and linen don't mix, because sheep produce wool, flax produces linen, and you see that the first time you ever had a conflict between wool and linen, it led to machlokes and ultimately led to murder. So what happened? HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepted Hevel's korban. HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not accept Cain's korban. This made Cain jealous. How is it possible that my younger sibling upstaged me? And there's no explanation. The stakes aren't particularly high. God wanted one and not the other. Hashem said no to this one. Hashem said yes to this one. This infuriates Cain, and without any ceremony, Cain gets up and kills his brother. The Medrash described that it wasn't as simple and straightforward. The Medrash says that he didn't even know how to kill. This was the first act of murder. So in a horrific scene, he tried to kill him by poking and attacking and hitting him in all different parts of his body until he figured out how to take a soul. You imagine how fallen we are from that point, that every human being, when they reach a certain age, understands how to kill another person. God forbid we should ever think of that. But Cain didn't even know how to kill his brother. He had to experiment until he figured it out. And there's no explanation. The machlokes doesn't seem to be that severe. The argument doesn't seem to be over really that much. God likes this one more than me, okay. Not too bad to be second place. But when second place is also last place, I guess it's devastating emotionally. But what happened was not just the first act of murder, not just the first act of fratricide, but also the greatest mass murder in history, because 50% of the world was killed off. There is not a single villain in human history that is responsible for that percentage of lives, if you think about what Cain committed. So stakes are relatively low. A younger sibling upstages the older sibling, and the older sibling kills the younger sibling. The next machlokes is Yitzchak and Ishmael. What is going on? It's a machlokes over who is the favorite son, right? Sarah sees greatness in Yitzchak. Actually, this is not yet at this point, but it's a favorite son status, because Sarah wants her own son, Yitzchak, and she sees a problem with Yishmael, and as a result, she asks Abraham to throw Yishmael out of the house. Abraham feels a little bit conflicted about it, but he listens to her because the Kodesh Baruch Hu says you have to listen. And then there's the question of nurturing versus disdain. Yitzchak is safeguarded, he's cared for. Yishmael is cast to be vulnerable and all alone and thirsty in the desert. Yitzchak is subject to the Akedah because Kodesh Baruch Hu only asks of us to sacrifice that which is treasured, and Yishmael is not subject to the Akedah. Instead, the Pasuk says, Shvu lachem po im hachamor. You, Yishmael, stayed down here with the donkey. And Chazal make a very big deal about it. Shvu lachem po im hachamor, am hadomeh lachamor. You stay below the mountain like a donkey, while we elevate the status of Yitzchak in the greatest moment of sacrifice and commitment to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Because you're willing to sacrifice. A great act of sacrifice means that you have to actually love the person with all your heart. In fact, there is a conflict in Islamic tradition as to whether the Akedah involved Ishmael or whether it was Yitzchak and then it was a source of jealousy. What's the result of this conflict? So the stakes, I would say, are noticeably higher here. Here we're talking about the love of a parent, abandonment of one child, versus the dedication of another child, who Yitzchak Karach Hazera, that Yitzchak will be the future progeny of the Jewish people. Yitzchak is the source of Zechut Avot, of ancestral merit, not Ishmael. And the result doesn't end in murder, but ends in estrangement and a possible reunion, because years later, though Yishmael and Yitzchak never speak again, they do show up at the same funeral. There's a moment in which Abraham is buried, and you find in the Torah describes how Yishmael is suddenly there. And if you follow the Midrashim describe that for years Yishmael was living separate, and he came back just for the funeral. These are the estranged siblings. They never say another word to one another, but at least they come to the funeral. At least they're there for that day, and they put on the public, they give the public impression that they do function civilly in the same family, although they never converse once again. So the stakes are higher. The result, tragic, but not as bad. Let's go to the next conflict. Yaakov and Esau. The stakes here are even higher. The blessing, the future success for all generations. Who gets the lion's share? Who gets nothing? Esau says, is there not a bracha left for me? And Esau's response, he's furious. Esau, after giving up his future for a bowl of nizida dashim, of a bowl of lentils, he threatens to murder his brother. His brother has to run away to the home of his uncle, and there has to deal with his own type of treachery, spends a good portion of his life in fear of Esau, finally has to confront his demons. He wrestles with Esau, or a manifestation of Esau, and then finally, the tearful reunion. The two share a hug, a kiss. That's this week's parsha, right? As the two bond and reunite in a kiss. The Chazal dispute whether it was a real kiss or whether he bit his neck. It's machlokes, but according to one day at least, they had a real reunion. It wasn't this silent Cold War where they sit side by side with sunglasses on and they don't talk at the funeral. They actually spoke. They exchanged gifts. They talked about the past. They told one another about their children, their families, and what had gone on all those years. And they lamented what was lost in the relationship. At least there was a reunion. So as the stakes get higher and higher, a threat for murder, which is far higher stakes than what happened by Cain and Hevel, the actual result is much better. It's interesting. As things get worse, the outcome is a lot softer. But things are not perfect, and we wouldn't say Yaakov and Esau had a peachy relationship. At least according to one tradition, it doesn't end well, but at least it doesn't end in death. It doesn't end in complete silent treatment, but it ends in two lives, two families, two worlds built without knowing what the other one did. And tragedy, when families look back after 20, 30 years and they say, gosh, look at those grandchildren. I never even met them. I didn't even know their names. That's the story of Esav and Yaakov. And then we get to the most famous sibling rivalry in all of Chumash Bereshis, the sibling rivalry between Yosef and his brothers. Stakes here are highest of all. Not only is there a threat, an attempted murder, there's jealousy, there's kidnapping, there's throwing in a pit, lying about his death, and enslavement. They sell him to be a slave. As far as they're concerned, Yosef is dead. They've done much worse to precipitate machlokes than Esav and Yaakov. And yet the result is much better than Esav and Yaakov. The result is a full reunion. Here's Yosef reuniting with his brothers in the picture I drew up earlier today. And I'm just kidding, I didn't draw this picture. And there's only one thing missing according to Rabbeinu Bachai. Rabbeinu Bachai says it is a real reunion. Yosef vows he will not take revenge. In fact, the brothers say, Lu yistamenu Yosef. God forbid Yosef will hate us. And that word yistamenu is a mila yichida. It appears only twice in all of Chumash. Yistom, it says, Vayistom, Esav hated his brother and vowed to kill him. And the brothers suspected Yosef of Lu yistamenu. Maybe he hates us. Maybe he wants to take revenge like Esav wanted to take revenge against Yaakov. But at the end, Yosef says, no, I don't bear a grudge. I will not take revenge. I will not kill you. That's not what Father wanted. There is only one thing missing from this reunion. What is the only thing missing from the reunion? According to Rabbeinu Bachai, he says, Yosef doesn't say the words, I forgive you, and the brothers don't say the words, I'm sorry. It's the only thing lacking from the entire discussion. And so, as the stakes get higher and higher, the reunion and the love, the tshuva, becomes more palpable, but it's not a complete tshuva. And then we arrive in Chumash Shemos. The Abarbanel famously points out that because of the sibling rivalry, because Yosef was sold into slavery, as a result, the punishment was the slavery of the Jewish people. He's the one who connects, Mida Keneged Mida, that we went into slavery in Egypt because Yosef was sold to be a slave. That every child who will be born will be cast into the Nile, just as Yosef was cast into the bore, just as Yosef was cast into a pit. Mida Keneged Mida, a measure for a measure. And so we understand this divine retribution, this divine punishment, is a direct result of the sibling rivalry from the book of Bereshis, the unfinished business. As Rabbeinu Bachai says, Adayin hachet ba'avir poreach, the sin is still floating in the air and still hasn't been reconciled. So how does God reconcile that? He enslaves the entire Jewish people as a result of the crime of brother against brother, of sibling against sibling. When this happens, the stage is primed for the ultimate machlokes between siblings. If you think the stakes were high, wait till you see what happens next. Who is the single most important figure in Jewish history? It is Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe, like Yosef, like Yaakov, like Hevel, like Yitzchak, is the youngest sibling. And it doesn't bode well when the youngest sibling outshines the older sibling. Believe me, this happened in my family, and my brother did not like it very much. I'm just joking there. It doesn't bode well when a younger sibling rises to a level of prominence and accomplishment and achievement that the older sibling doesn't get. That's what precipitated every machlokes in the book of Bereshis. And at last, we encounter the perfect storm. Here's a clip from Prince of Egypt. Rashi, DreamWorks, I think is the producer here if you need it. Rashi tells us that when the baby was born, they saw ki tovu. The house was filled with light. The Christians borrowed from this imagery about a baby born and the house gets filled with light. It's midrashic about Moshe. Just replace the savior. When he was born, the house was filled with light. Imagine that in those conditions, the older brother, maybe the older sister, would be jealous. Because this young kid comes along and everybody's focused on this child. But the problem gets even worse, because Paro decreed that every child has to be thrown into the Nile. And if that's the case, then there is actually a threat on the child's life. Now, what happens when Lo Aleinu there's a child in the family who is sick? What happens, God forbid, when crisis affects one child? So we know exactly what happens. All of the attention is taken away from the other siblings, and it is thrown directly on the one who's having trouble. Whether it's a learning disability, whether it's a sickness, God forbid, whether it's some family crisis. And whether they say it or not, many siblings will secretly resent the fact that everybody focuses on this child who seems to be the source of drama, of trauma, of problems. We joked in our family that my older brother, he was he went through a terrible illness in high school, and was in a coma for a couple of days. Baruch Hashem, he's fine, he's successful today, and he's healthy. But when this happened, after he woke up, so a few interesting things happened. But one, for us, we were told that we weren't allowed to punch him in the stomach for at least 2 months. So for siblings, this is tragic, because part of the way you get along is you get to fight with one another. We weren't allowed to hit him for 2 months. So this, of course, made us. I see my mother's on the call; she can confirm the story. So this, of course, made us, made us feel a sense of, well, why does he get all the attention? But we created a moniker for him as a result, and that moniker was Coma Boy. We ended up calling him Coma Boy every time we perceived favoritism. There was never favoritism. My parents are our ideal parents, but every time we perceived that, we labeled him Coma Boy. So now you can imagine the history of sibling rivalry. A younger sibling upstages the older sibling. Stage is set. The house is filled with light. The young Messiah has been born, right? Little perfect child. And now there's a threat on that golden boy's life. Wow. You can imagine at that moment, at least Miriam and Aaron were disregarded. And yet we find Miriam standing there, outstretching her arms, looking mirachok to see what's going to happen with Moshe. She's the greatest fan, the greatest supporter. What's Aaron's relationship like with Moshe? The result is very beautiful. Moshe is appointed as the leader of the younger sibling, though Aaron had been leading them for many years earlier. And Moshe says, who am I? I can't take this job. Vayicharaf Hashem b'Moshe. Kadosh Baruch Hu was furious with Moshe Rabbeinu. V'yomer halo Aharon achicha halevi yadati ki daber yidaber hu v'gam hinei hu yotze l'krosecha v'rocha v'samach belibo. Not only have you upstaged Aaron, and are you reluctant to take your post, but Aaron, your older brother, who was replaced by you, is thrilled for you. He couldn't be happier than to see his younger brother rise to prominence and become the de facto king of the Jewish people. And the Medrash Tanchum extols this relationship. Matovo lecha Yaakov. How goodly and pleasant it is for brothers to dwell. That's not the pasuk he's quoting here. It says, Matov maniim shevet achim gam yachad. Pasuk Tehillim, how great is it that brothers sit together. So you all they loved each other. When Moshe became the king, Aaron et the kahuna, and Aaron became the kohen. Lo sanu zeh et zeh. They didn't hate one another. Each one was happier. Moshe didn't get the kahuna, and Moshe not becoming the kohen meant that he couldn't bequeath his leadership to his children. We don't hear about Moshe's children. But what happens to Aaron's children? They become the high priests. Even to this day, all of the Kohanim are direct descendants of Aaron. We don't know what happened to Moshe's direct descendants. We have no idea. And because of that, Moshe would have ample reason to be jealous of Aaron. Aaron certainly has ample reason to be jealous of Moshe, but instead they are happy for one another. Look how happy he is in his heart of hearts. The Medrash says that if only he knew that this moment was being recorded for posterity, he would have come out cheering him on with tup macholot, with bells and with drums and tambourines, singing Hail to the Chief. The greatest moment in sibling history rectifies a long, difficult history of Jewish brothers and human brothers not getting along. And that moment is the perfect storm. It was all brought about because of sibling rivalry. And two brothers learned to be bigger than that. And here's the secret. How do siblings get along? You have to want the best for the other person. It's not always fair. One has more money, one has more charm, one has better looks, one has an easier marriage, one has smarter children, right? All sorts of problems that develop throughout the years. Then there's the conflict that happens as parents age. And children live near the parents, other children don't. It's no one's fault, but it happens. These types of issues develop jealousy, conflict, resentment. Instead of doing that, one has to learn to see and treasure the other person's accomplishments. And it's easier said than done. To really be happy for someone else is something only a brother can do or a sister can do. To genuinely not disdain someone else's, to not be cynical about what someone else accomplishes. Sibling is the only relationship where you really feel 100% so happy for another person, where there's not a little shemetz of jealousy. It's possible. It's possible to achieve that. I would say, obviously, children, one wants their children to achieve greater than them. But in terms of your parallel relationships, that might be one of the highest points. And that's why the sibling relationship is extolled as the deepest and greatest love that ever existed. There's a word in the German language, Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is a German word because no other people can come up with such a term. Schadenfreude means wanting to see someone else suffer, right? The desire, the joy you derive when someone else falls, someone else collapses. Judaism, we have a concept, being polo ivecha al tismach. When your enemy falls, don't be happy. Germans, there's a word. There's actually a word in the German language for being happy for someone else's demise. It's a fantastic idea. And Judaism believes in the opposite. The joy we derive, al simchat hazulat, the joy we derive when someone else has a simcha. That's the greatest thing in the world. The greatest thing in the world is to be happy for someone else's success. The very end of the book of Shmos shows the imagery of the Kruvim. We leave Egypt, we receive the Torah. On top of the centerpiece of the Holy Ark are two angels, the wings spread out facing one another. And the Torah says, Pnehen ish el achiv, their faces facing one another, brother to brother. Why are they described as brothers? The Bial Rebbe Shlita says that that's the culmination of the story, the age-old story of sibling rivalry. The book of Bereshis, of Cain and Hevel, of Yishmael and Yitzchak, of Yaakov and Esav, of Yosef and the tribes, and ultimately Moshe and Aaron who rectify family drama. The redemption of the Jewish people only comes the redemption of the family. And that final imagery we get after all is fixed and we become a nation and we learn how to treat one another as brothers. In that moment, we have the symbol of the Shekhinah, the presence of God, the divine presence that speaks from between siblings. God speaks from a place of people who want what's best for one another. It's the model for a nation. It's not just brothers and sisters. It's a nation of Jewish people. We want what's best for one another. And if we could do that, we could bring the Shekhinah back into our lives. That's the final image of the book of Shmos. And so I want to leave you with one idea, and that is that sibling rivalry is complex. It's deep-rooted. goes back to history. It's part of our nature. Competition is how we make each other grow. And there's jealousy that is the result of circumstance, tragedy. It's the result of unfair treatment. It's the result of blessings that God bestows on some people and doesn't bestow on others. At the end of the day, life's not fair. Life's not even, despite what the world tells you that everybody has to have equity and everybody has to have an equal shake. Not everybody's going to have it equal. But everybody has a responsibility to see the joy and see the accomplishments of the other person. To say it's not my lot. One piece of advice I once heard is that to avoid this sort of jealousy is that imagine, your best friend got a nice pair of glasses, right? And you saw the glasses, and the prescription was really perfect for their eyes because they're able to see 20/20. Would you say, oh, I really need that prescription? I really need that. I'm jealous of that prescription. You're not jealous of someone else's prescription because it doesn't work for your eyes. I mean, I'm jealous of everyone's prescription because I can't see on my left eye. But what I mean is, you wouldn't want what was designed for another person. Kadosh Baruch Hu has decided the different pieces that each of us need. Be happy for the other person. Simchat hazulad. Start by teaching our children who, especially during the COVID period, are in each other's faces, not getting along. And for those siblings who haven't seen each other in forever, right? Try by reaching out and teaching one another and teaching ourselves to find the merit, to find the accomplishments that the other person has achieved, and shunning the notion of schadenfreude from our vocabulary and from our hearts, and being happy for the other person to accomplish Tam Isha Lachiv. Have a wonderful evening, a good Shabbos, and in Mitzvah Shem, we will continue this series in the future. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Shabbos.
Good night.